Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, and today we're delving into another unsettling case. On December 18th, 2013, a young woman named Brianna Warland was suddenly awakened by an unexpected phone call at 1:45 in the morning. She answered the call to find her best friend Heather on the line, distraught. Heather shared a recent conversation she had with Sydney, her former partner. Sydney had called her, disclosing that he had separated from his spouse, expressing remorse for their past breakup, and requesting Heather to consider restarting their relationship. Curious, Brianna inquired why Heather even picked up the call. It turned out that the number was unfamiliar, prompting Heather to answer after listening and slightly calming her friend down. Brianna emphasized that Heather had recently moved past the challenges of their breakup and shouldn't rekindle things with Sydney. She convinced Heather to go back to sleep and take some rest, and they bid their farewells. The scenic Horry County in South Carolina is frequently regarded as an ideal living destination. This area is renowned for its picturesque beauty. Down less traveled roads rarely frequented by cars. The authorities verified the car's registration in their database and discovered it was registered to Terry. Elvis officers were sent to his residence. Upon knocking on his door and informing him about the discovered car, Terry was found at home, watching TV on his living room sofa. It became apparent that the car belonged to his daughter, Heather. Terry attempted to reach Heather by phone, but she remained unreachable. He agreed to accompany the authorities to Peachtree Landing to further investigate upon discovering his daughter's car in such an unusual and secluded location. Terry was taken aback but initially not excessively concerned about his daughter. He speculated that the car might have been stolen, finding it strange that it was there without its owner. After obtaining a spare key from Terry, the police unlocked the car and conducted a thorough inspection. They discovered no personal belongings in the cabin, including Heather's purse, keys, or mobile phone. Terry's worry escalated, and he attempted to contact Heather once more, still without receiving a response. He contacted the restaurant where she was employed. The manager relayed to him that Heather hadn't reported for work and wasn't scheduled until the following day. Sensing that something was wrong, Terry notified the police of his concerns, expressing that such behavior was entirely out of character for his daughter, and that something must have occurred. At that moment, the car and the riverbank where it was discovered were not designated as a crime scene, given the absence of signs of a struggle, broken glass, or blood. Nonetheless, authorities opted to initiate a missing person investigation. He contacted the restaurant where she was employed. The manager relayed to him that Heather hadn't reported for work and wasn't scheduled until the following day. Sensing that something was wrong, Terry notified the police of his concerns, expressing that such behavior was entirely out of character for his daughter, and that something must have occurred. Heather's father observed that their family had consistently been close-knit and supportive. Despite Heather's independence, she maintained regular communication with her father, talking to him daily by phone in 2011. Following her graduation from St. James High School, Heather informed her family of her decision to reside with her best friend, Brianna Warland. Her parents wholeheartedly endorsed this choice. At the age of 20, Heather worked as a waitress at the Tilted Kilt, a Scottish-themed restaurant in Myrtle Beach, and aspired to pursue a career as a cosmetologist. Her younger sister, Morgan, mentioned that Heather's interests included makeup, working in front of the camera, and she was renowned for her creativity and ambition. Heather was also a well-liked figure in her community, known for her kind, carefree, and positive nature. Brianna, her friend, highlighted that when people reminisce and speak about her, they can't help but smile because she consistently exuded a bright personality. In 2013, Heather had been residing for a year with her close friend Brianna in Myrtle Beach. Her academic pursuits were thriving, and life appeared to be full of promise. However, a twist of fate unfolded when an unexpected meeting at the Tilted Kilt propelled Heather onto a path marked by tragedy. On a balmy June afternoon, Heather was diligently handling the day's shift at the bustling restaurant, engaging with customers, taking orders, and shuttling trays into the kitchen. It was during this time that she crossed paths with Sidney Moore, a 37-year-old father of three and a handyman. Sidney operated a small kitchen appliance repair business in Myrtle Beach and had received an order from the restaurant on that particular day. They initiated a conversation, and Heather felt an immediate connection to the man. Subsequently, their interactions grew more frequent, discovering shared interests and hobbies. Heather subtly expressed her feelings on Twitter, indicating an attraction to older men by the end of July. Heather started sharing personal messages directed to Sidney, who was in the process of renovating her restaurant. She also openly discussed Sidney with her friends and coworkers, disclosing that he was the individual mentioned in her Twitter posts. Sidney appreciated Heather's attention, and he began making frequent appearances at the restaurant. They often enjoyed each other's company in the kitchen while Sidney worked on fixing appliances. By July, their connection likely progressed from innocent flirting to a more profound involvement, as indicated by 2 tweets Heather shared within a minute of each other. In one tweet, she referenced that she had taken a significant step, and in the other, she expressed that she was too deeply involved to halt. The majority of Heather's colleagues were aware of her feelings for 37-year-old Sidney, leading to widespread gossip about their relationship. A colleague later confessed that everyone was aware of their relationship and disapproved of it due to Sidney's marital status. Additionally, they would mockingly refer to Heather using different names, and at one point, they played a prank on her. 2 colleagues called the restaurant pretending to be Tammy, Sidney's wife. In August, the speculations were substantiated. Sidney started frequenting the restaurant more regularly, consistently bringing Heather coffee and treats. He would sit in the dining area or wait for her at the back door after her shift so they could depart together. The pair frequently divulged aspects of their relationship to friends, and Sidney even went as far as informing acquaintances about his intentions to hire Heather as a full-time nanny when he and his wife relocated to Florida. Heather also shared Sidney's plans with her friends, and many found it peculiar. The couple maintained constant communication over the phone and frequently embarked on journeys to distant and secluded locations in their vehicles for private rendezvous. It became evident that this relationship was detrimental to Heather. Sidney consistently reassured her, claiming to be tired, dissatisfied with his wife, and expressing a desire to leave her. However, it appeared that these were mere empty promises. All of Heather's friends cautioned her that Sidney was simply using her. By mid-September, Heather appeared to acknowledge the predicament she was in. On September 21st, she posted on Twitter, "Once an angel and a demon fell in love, but it didn't lead to a good outcome." Perhaps, this was the day she attempted to sever the perplexing bond with Sidney. The pivotal moment arrived when Tammy, a 34-year-old woman and Sidney's wife of 3 decades, discovered her husband's clandestine affair. She reached out to Heather, subjecting her to humiliating verbal attacks over the phone. Brianna, Heather's roommate, bore witness to the conversation and later informed investigators that Heather endured the insults for an extended period. At one juncture, Tammy asserted that Sidney was merely exploiting Heather for his fantasies, even compelling Sidney to convey this message personally over the phone. Sidney echoed his wife's sentiments, conveying to Heather that she held no significance for him and was an easy target. Unsurprisingly, this deeply affected the young woman, as Sidney and Tammy succeeded in making her feel wretched, practically dismantling her sense of self. Prosecutor Chris Helms later determined that Tammy held a dominant position in the Mauer household, dictating Sidney's work schedule and controlling all of his actions. Helms also observed that Tammy, fueled by fury over the betrayal, could not find it in herself to forgive both Sidney and Heather. Thus, she resolved to devastate the young woman's life. Following the revelation of the truth, Tammy commenced a series of tormenting actions. She began handcuffing Sidney and securing him to the bed at night to prevent him from leaving while she slept. Additionally, she altered the password on his phone and compelled him to undergo the pain of getting a tattoo with her name on his stomach. Sidney consented to all these measures, hoping to salvage his marriage and preserve his family. As per Brianna, Tammy's attacks transcended mere phone calls and escalated into systematic acts of hatred. Tammy commenced a relentless campaign of making constant phone calls to Heather's workplace, insisting on her termination. Moreover, she persisted in calling Heather from Sydney's phone, sending images and videos of the two of them together, including intimate encounters. Heather composed a letter to Sydney, pleading with him to intervene and put an end to Tammy's relentless harassment, which was adversely affecting her job. Distressed and disheartened by the mistreatment from the man she once loved, Heather exerted every effort to restore order to her life. This included the initiative of attending church with her best friend in early November. Tammy continued her onslaught by sending Heather fresh threatening messages, demanding Heather to disclose her address. Tammy issued warnings that if Heather did not comply, she would locate her regardless, and the repercussions would be severe. Tammy also asserted that she had been monitoring Sydney since January 2012 and insinuated that Heather could no longer have any influence on him. At this juncture, Heather found herself utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. She couldn't fathom why Tammy persisted in tormenting her, particularly since her relationship with Sydney had long ended, and she earnestly desired to move on and forget everything that transpired. Heather confided in her friend, expressing that Tammy appeared to be fixated on her. Towards the conclusion of November, over 2 weeks after enduring Tammy's threatening messages, a semblance of calm began to settle. Sydney and Tammy embarked on a 3-day trip to California with their 3 children in their new Ford F-150 SUV, creating a more family-oriented atmosphere out of town. This reprieve allowed Heather to finally relax and savor the moment. Furthermore, Heather experienced a joyful milestone in her life as she secured her dream job at a beauty salon as a makeup artist. Set to commence work before Christmas, Heather was elated and eagerly shared the exciting news with friends and family. However, concerns started to arise in her life that could potentially worsen her issues with Tammy in early November. Heather and her coworkers at Tilted Kilt observed that she had rapidly gained weight within a short period. Alarmed and anxious that she might be pregnant with Sydney's child, Heather, distressed and frightened, opted to take a pregnancy test at the restaurant. Her manager, Jessica Cook, later informed the police that Heather was distressed about the entire situation and feared that Tammy might do something dreadful to her. However, the test turned out to be faulty, and at that juncture, Heather never discovered whether or not she was pregnant with Sydney's child. Heather's best friend also noted that when she took a pregnancy test at work in early November, Heather had not been intimate with anyone other than Sydney. Despite concerns about a potential pregnancy in the winter of 2013, Heather remained optimistic. She decided it was time to move forward and make a fresh start. Hoping for a new, happier, and healthier relationship, she agreed to go on a first date with Steve Gerald, a man she had known briefly but was genuinely attracted to. On the evening of December 17th, Heather and Steve met around 10 p.m. and decided to drive around Myrtle Beach to admire the Christmas lights. A little later, they decided to stop at a nearby parking lot where Steve taught Heather how to drive his manual transmission car. Excited, Heather sent her father a picture of herself behind the wheel of the car with the words, "I just learned to drive like a true professional." Steve later mentioned that they arranged a second date, and he dropped her off at her Carolina Forest apartment. Around 1:15 a.m., detectives had a hard time finding specific clues or leads. So they decided to put together a timeline of events that occurred before Heather's disappearance on December 17th and 18th. The prime suspect was Steve Gerald, with whom Heather had spent the evening before her disappearance. However, after questioning, no evidence of his involvement was found, and suspicions against him were dropped. Heather's family and friends were surprised that, while they were doing their best to find the girl, reaching out to the public, and offering a reward for information about her whereabouts, Tammy, at the same time, became active on social media, continuing to insult Heather. This sparked outrage and drew the attention of investigators, leading the investigation. On December 20th, after Brianna and her colleagues at the restaurant told the police about the affair between Sydney and Heather, detectives called Sydney in for questioning. Throughout the interrogation, Sidney was evasive and reserved, claiming that he was not near Peachtree Landing on the night of December 17th to 18th. He also claimed that he had no contact with Heather and was on a trip with his wife Tammy at the time. Detectives believed he was lying, but they needed proof. That's when investigators turned their attention to Heather's call history and phone records, and they were finally able to find the first clues. By reconstructing Heather's movements on the day of her disappearance, they tried to determine Sidney's connection to these events. According to Brianna, on December 18th, Heather received a call from an unknown number. A call that lasted only 5 minutes. After that, Heather repeatedly tried to call the number back, starting at 1:35 a.m. She attempted to dial the number a total of 9 times, indicating her insistence on talking to someone she knew. Police were able to pinpoint the exact location where the call was made from. It was a payphone near a gas station in Myrtle Beach. Surveillance footage confirmed that an unknown male was entering the phone booth at the time Heather received the call. All of this evidence was presented to Sidney, who initially denied making the call but later admitted that he called Heather to ask her to leave him alone. Tammy Moore was also called in for questioning, where she spoke about her marriage and the situation but denied any involvement in Heather's disappearance. She also stated that Heather had led an inappropriate lifestyle and called her behavior abnormal. Tammy argued that the problem was not just infidelity but Heather's behavior in general. Based on these suspicions, detectives decided to check all the security cameras in the neighborhood and quickly uncovered evidence. Shortly before Heather's call, Sidney was captured on video buying a pregnancy test at a local supermarket. When asked if the test was for him, the man said it was for his wife. Even more compelling evidence discovered later was footage from cameras installed along an isolated stretch of road leading to Peachtree Landing. These tapes showed a Ford F-150, very similar to Sidney's vehicle, driving toward the location where Heather's car was found at 3:36 am, and then leaving the area about 10 minutes later. Experts later confirmed that the SUV captured on the footage was indeed Sidney's. He was the last person Heather spoke to, and according to investigators, the last person to see her at Peachtree Landing. Using Heather's phone records, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of her recent movements. At 2:30 a.m., Heather's phone attempted to call the payphone number Sidney was using, but there was no answer. She then visited Longbeard's Bar and Grill in Carolina Forest, not far from her apartment. She stayed there for about 15 minutes, and then headed toward Augusta Plantation Drive. She then returned to Longbeard's and stayed there for another 15 minutes. Heather tried calling Sidney again, but got no answer, and then went to her apartment where she stayed for 5 minutes. At 3:25 a.m., Sidney's phone received another call, which he answered, and they talked for 4 minutes. At 3:37 a.m., Heather's phone was at Peachtree Landing, from where she made 3 attempts to call Sidney, but all went unanswered. The last attempt to call Sidney was made at 3:41, and by 3:42, the phone was disconnected. Security footage of Sidney's vehicle became incriminating evidence. However, even more compromising evidence was discovered in a search of the Moores' home conducted after investigators obtained a warrant. Suspiciously, the Moores got rid of their home video surveillance system on December 20th and installed a new one the next day. Although investigators were unable to access footage from the previous system, they seized recordings from the new one. The footage shows Sidney and Tammy Moore thoroughly wiping down the interior of their car and then burning the rags they used to clean it, all on the day the new surveillance system was installed. In 2014, months after Heather Elvis disappeared, police achieved a breakthrough in the case. On February 21st of that year, it was announced that Sidney and Tammy Moore had been arrested on charges of kidnapping Heather. They were later charged with murder as well, even though Heather's body was never found. However, while in jail, the Moores refused to give any testimony. The police continued to search for Heather's body because without it, they did not have enough evidence to bring the murder charges to trial. Eventually, the murder charges were dropped, but the kidnapping charge remained. Heather's mother, Debbie, was disappointed that the charges were dropped but felt relieved that she would not have to attend the trial and hear the details of what may have happened to her daughter. Heather's family hoped it would encourage potential witnesses to testify. Ultimately, Sidney Moore's 5 months in custody were not the end of it. In 2017, he was found guilty of obstructing justice and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Following this, Sidney and Tammy were to stand trial for the kidnapping of Heather Elvis. The case generated immense public interest and received widespread media coverage. In 2019, 6 years after Heather's disappearance, several lengthy court hearings took place where numerous witness testimonies, evidence, and proof of the couple's involvement in the crime were presented. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury made their decision, and justice was served. Sidney and Tammy Moore were found guilty of kidnapping Heather Elvis. The court sentenced the Moores to 30 years of imprisonment each for their crime and the associated conspiracy. Both husband and wife will serve their terms concurrently. Following the verdict, Sidney requested to speak in the courtroom. Despite the conviction, he desperately continued to assert his innocence. He addressed Heather's parents with understanding and sympathy, stating that their daughter was a wonderful girl, and he regretted the tragedy that befell her, being a father himself. He acknowledged that he couldn't undo what had happened between him and Heather, but nothing could change now. Heather's parents gave an interview after the trial, which was extremely difficult for them. They expressed hope that this wouldn't be the end and believed that someday Sidney and Tammy would reveal the truth about the crime. They described their daughter as a bright and sincere girl who suffered at the hands of the deceitful and cruel Moores. On Heather's birthday, her loved ones organized a campaign at the public park where her car was found. Residents of the area brought flowers and donations to the memorial site. The funds raised were directed to a center for missing persons as a tribute to Heather and a way to support her family in their quest to find their daughter and learn the truth. To this day, Heather Elvis's body remains unfound. Her family continues to share missing person announcements annually on her birthday, aiming to draw attention and keep her memory, as well as that of others who have vanished alive. Debbie, Heather's mother, expressed that she cannot find peace until she learns what happened to her daughter. She continues to hope that her persistence will contribute to uncovering the truth, believing that someday someone will come forward and reveal what really happened to Heather.